Hello, my name is Gary Boyd. I am the designer of the great micro game Conflicts of Central Asia. It is a coin battleground hybrid micro game, which if you don't know what that means, that's okay. This is an introduction to both of those things, sort of. It's going to be a really quick intro. I'm first going to introduce you to the card layout and exactly what these things mean. So in the upper left-hand corner, you'll notice the value 12. If this is used as a battleground, and that's one of the ways of scoring points, then that is the target value that the attack values of both players combined has to equal for this battleground to score. Once a battleground is scored, the majority of the points, so in this case 7 out of the 12, would go to the player with the highest attack value, and the rest of the points, the 5, would go to the player with the lowest attack value. So in the case of a card that was worth 10 points, it would be 6 and 4. In the case of a card that is worth 9 points, it would be 5 and 4. So there's not a big difference on how much you score. The main thing to be aware of is not letting your opponent score an entire card, because that can really hurt you, especially if it's worth 12 points. So you'll start the game in 2-player or 1-player by shuffling the deck. And in 2-player, each player will get a hand. In single player, only you will get the hand. You'll look at your hand. You'll choose your empire first. So I'm not going to look at my hand. I'm going to choose the Russian Empire. The Russian Empire is a little more difficult to play. If you have played before and you are playing with someone who has not, I recommend you play the Russian Empire. It's a little more nuanced. As the Russian Empire, I want to choose a card as a battleground that would hurt me if I kept it. And the reason I say that is that any card with my opponent's flag, so if I'm the Russian Empire, any card with the British flag, if I play that during the game, except as a battleground, is going to negatively impact me, because I'm going to have to deal with the event text. So I'm going to play that as my battleground, and then in a 2-player game, the opponent would choose a battleground. In the 1-player game, and the top card is revealed, and that is the battleground. For player with the highest target value goes first. So in this case, the solo mode would go first. So as the solo mode, you would draw a card, and if there is a crossed out K1M in the lower left-hand corner, that means that you would ignore the event text. But if you're playing the basic mode, the introduction mode to solo, nothing would happen with the event text. If you're playing the advanced mode, you would give K1M 2 influence and then move on to step 2. So the event text triggers on a friendly event or a neutral event. Neutral events have both flags. In a normal 2-player game, the only time neutral events trigger is when you play them for event text, and they're usually a little stronger, and they apply to both players. So on this particular card, the event text does not trigger because of the K1M crossed out. Then we go to the next step. If I place my card on a battleground, will it score? Well, there's no cards on the battleground, so it won't score. If it has an influence value of 4 or greater, it does have an influence value of 4. So at this point, we would stop. We would play this card to gain influence. And when you play a card to gain influence, you want to face it towards you. So if this were an actual opponent, it would be facing this way. If a card is placed for event text, you want to face it towards your opponent so that they can read the event text. So this one would be played for 4. My opponent would gain 4 influence. This is a 5, and they're giving back a 1. So they're now at 6 influence. As you can see, I'm a little behind even just to start here. So I'm going to play this card to India. It has an attack value of 5 and a defense value of 3. It's a pretty good card, and it has my flag, so I get to ignore the event text. The event text wouldn't trigger, wouldn't do anything good for me in this particular circumstance anyways, so it's a good card to attack with. And then it would be the solo mode or my opponent's turn again. So in solo mode, here again we have a K1M crossed out. This time we have a neutral flag, so you can see the British Empire flag here, the Russian Empire flag here. K1M gets another 2 influence, and we go through the procedure. Does my opponent have a card at a battleground? If so, take the attack action on the same battleground and follow the combat procedure. So this card will attack this card, and when attacks are triggered, each player gets a chance card, and or a card that adds to the value of either the attack or defense. In this case, my defense would equal out to 5. Their attack would equal out to 10. They got the absolute best card you can get for diplomacy value. This is the bottom. It knocks my card off of here and leaves only their card. So they currently have 3 on India and have knocked. I would go ahead and play a card. I think this is a really good card to play. I'm going to play this. Double your next gain influence action. Gain if China is in play. China is in play as a battleground, so we're going to face that towards our opponent because it's event text, and the opponent's going to act. This is Invasion of Lhasa. So the Russian player must give you 1 influence each time she takes a gain, influence, attack, or attack action for the remainder of the round. Wow, this is a really crappy card for me as the Russian Empire. So the event text is going to trigger because it's K1M. If my opponent has no cards at a battleground, place my card on a battleground where I have the most influence. So currently I have 3 influence, and now I'm sorry, K1M has 3 influence, and now it has 7 influence in India. So it's going to attempt to score India. I really want to get a card on India, and I suppose the best thing to do for me is to play at least 1 card here and try to maintain it. Try to make sure I score some points on India, because they're going to be able to score it next round, and if I can't let them get 12 points. So whatever the card they come up with next, the event text here, unfortunately, it's more British. It's also crossed out K1M, so they just gain 2 influence, and then we move on to the next step. If I place my card on a battleground, will it score? The total here is 10. Add 2, it equals 12. So they're going to place that, and they're going to take 7 influence. That's a return 1, and I'm going to take 5. So my first influence gain of the game is 5, and that battleground is scored. So we move it off to the side. I'm going to play this card to place this card on China. It has an attack value of 4. It only has a defense value of 2. Hoping that it'll stay on that particular battleground. They have this one here. It has Russian event text, so it's going to be ignored. And then the second is, does it have an influence value of 4 or higher? Yes, it does. It has an influence value of 5. So they're going to gain another 5. And you can see that I am losing very badly. So that is the game. Once 5 battlegrounds are removed from the game, and when they are removed, they are literally removed. So you'll score those 2 battlegrounds if they both get scored, they'll both be removed from the game, and then you will take all the remaining cards, shuffle them, and have another round. So you have fewer and fewer cards as you go. That's where the balance of power comes into play. If there happens to be no cards in the deck or discard at any point, the game ends immediately. The player whose turn it is loses the game. So there is a Russian card that triggers. You can choose whether to take 2 cards or force your opponent to draw 2 cards by upsetting the balance of power. So that's an introduction to both the 1 and 2 player game. If you have any questions, feel free to contact me. The best way is probably through the BGG forum for the Great Micro Game. Thank you very much. Enjoy and have a great time.